Why is the 85mm focal length considered ideal for portraiture? We're talking for full-frame cameras here. Generally speaking, an 85mm lens produces minimal facial distortion. It renders a nice background blur or bokeh, especially combined with a wide aperture that separates the subject from the background. This new lens from SIRUI would seem to fit the bill. 85mm focal length, full frame, f1.4, wide aperture, but does it cut the mustard? Hi, Ray here with the SIRUI Aurora 85mm f1.4 full frame autofocus lens for Nikon Z-mount. It's also available for Sony E and Fuji X. Fuji's APS-C sensor, however, would make this a 127.5mm equivalent. Full disclosure, SIRUI sent this lens in exchange for this review. I get to keep it, but that's the extent of my observation. This isn't a sponsored video, despite the alert. I'm just following YouTube's guidelines. I also want to preface this review by telling you that I've had this lens for a month now, and I've worked with it extensively. Regular viewers will know that I don't like to rush reviews like this to exploit early interest. I feel it's more valuable to my audience to have worked with a camera, lens, whatever, to better assess pros and cons, and to show results from my shoots. So I'll include both stills and video in this review, because I think it works well for both. But let's get the basic technical details out of the way first. As noted, this is a full-frame lens, SIRUI's first autofocus for stills. You may recall I reviewed their 23mm f1.2 APS-C sniper lens a while back, and I'm glad to see them enter the full-frame market. One might have expected them to debut a nifty 50 rather than an 85, but here we are, and why not? Out of the box, I really like the look of this lens, the lettering and general aesthetic design. The new Aurora logo is attractive to my eye. More importantly, the lens appears to be well built. The focusing ring is silky smooth. The body is constructed mainly of aluminum alloy, and SIRUI advertises dustproof and waterproof design. I think it might more appropriately be called weather sealed. And there's certainly a pretty decent gasket where the rubber meets the camera body. In any case, I've used this lens unprotected in some pretty heavy rain without any issues at all. And there's a USB Type-C input to perform firmware updates, more on that later, electronic contacts that support camera functions including eye autofocus, and I'll illustrate that in a minute or two. Object tracking and to pass EXIF data to the camera. On the aluminum barrel, there's a switch to, switch between autofocus and manual focus. I'm glad to see this feature. A lot easier than having to pull up the camera menu. An AFL button, press this to lock focus. It also doubles as a custom setting button. On the opposite side, right side, when the lens is mounted, a click on off button for the aperture ring. Choose whether you want that ring to click between f-stops or adjust smoothly. The latter is a feature that of course is preferred for video. This has a 67mm filter thread, which reminds that this is a pretty compact lens for a fast 85. And that's reflected in its weight as well, just 540 grams. Another contributing factor when it comes to size and weight is the use of ED and HRI glass, as well as an spherical lens. The front lens element is coated with anti-fouling fluorine to repel dust and make it easy to wipe away fingerprints or water spots. The lens hood is plastic, as they all are today, but it's solid, well made, and attaches securely. SIRUI also makes and provided UV and black mist filters. Here's a shot with and without the UV, with the black mist and without. And as promised, here's a look at autofocus tracking. Okay, before we get to examples, allow me to reiterate, because I've opined on this subject in other videos. Let me give my opinion on portrait lenses. For full body shots, 50mm is my go-to, and the wider the aperture the better to isolate the subject. The Nikon 50 f1.2 is an excellent example. 85mm lenses are perfect for 3/4 portraits, and in my opinion, 105mm is an absolute must-have for tight headshots, and it doesn't have to be super fast. I used the legendary Nikon 105 f2.5 for decades, as did countless other working photographers. Then 35, 28 or even 24mm are great for environmental portraits. To be honest, I didn't own an 85mm lens until about 5 years ago when I bought the Z85mm f1.8s, but then I kinda took to the 85mm, and when the 1.2 version came out, well, I had to grab one. I've described, and I hope demonstrated, how awesome that lens is. So here we have something in between a 1.4 and priced competitively at $599 US. However, right now there's an early bird sale that has it available for $499. You might have run into the promotions on social media. So how does it perform? Well, let's start off with a peek at a couple of examples in Lightroom. So let's first take a look at some bokeh balls. We can see here, we don't get perfectly round, not even out into the center here. And definitely towards the edges, we get some cat's eye. But I rather like the look of it. It's really quite lovely. This is at 1.4, so focus is right here somewhere, perhaps this branch. And I haven't done much to this at all, no sharpening. It's not quite raw, but not too much done to it. I really like it. Next, I want to look at a couple of photos that illustrate there's quite a bit of distortion in this lens. We can see here at the edge. And let's also look at this. Now this is a bit cockeyed, it needs straightening, but you can also see here some pretty extreme distortion. Here and here. The first thing that we need to do to this is make it kind of upright. Okay, fine there. Now let's deal with the distortion. First thing to note is that we do see the profile for this lens right here in Lightroom. Now let's go into manual and let's try and fix this distortion. So we can't get it perfect, but it's close enough. And then I just do a bit of cropping here, and of course this also needs lots of editing to make it look like anything, and maybe I'll put that in one of the galleries. Next, let's take a look at this lens wide open. We can see here that it's not super sharp. Let's compare that at 2.8, and we can see it's quite a bit sharper. Once we get to 2.8, sharpens right up from 1.4 to 2.8. Now let's have a look at chromatic aberration, because if it was going to be some, it would be in a shot like this. So at 100% here, I think we can see a bit of green definitely in there, and really quite obvious purple fringing down in here. Again, we can deal with that. Let's look at the fringing here. If we want to deal with some purple, yeah, gone. The green doesn't bother me so much, but again, let's deal with that. And I'm quite happy with that. I think that the chromatic aberration is quite well controlled on this lens. Again here, we can see quite a bit of distortion. And can we deal with that? There we go. Not perfect, but it's much, much better. So I don't want to spend too much time here. I'd rather illustrate with some more edited photos later on. Now, while this isn't a macro lens with a minimum focus distance of 0.85 meters, that's 2.8 feet, at its closest focusing, it definitely still has a nice look with that creamy out of focus bokeh. The bokeh is really worth showcasing, maybe with a dedicated gallery that shows bokeh ball shape and character. Yes, we do get pronounced cat's eyes at the edges, not a problem as I see it, and I think most people don't focus on these out of focus idiosyncrasies. Now, here's some more examples, these ones edited to my satisfaction, that I've made with this lens over the last month. Contrary to some other opinions on the interwebs, I think this is a perfectly good choice for video. Again, another useful tool with its own particular rendering. No, not super sharp, but isn't that what people who talk about cinematic video and dirtying up their footage prefer? I actually think this lens produces a nice clean look without the clinical results of many lenses, still leaving room for some post-production tinkering, if that's your thing. Like most modern non-cine lenses, this is focused by wire. Now, I didn't test this before the firmware update, more on that in a moment, but again, I'm going to contradict reviews that say manual focus pulls are not smooth. They look good to my eye. Focus breathing, it's there for sure, but not extreme. I've actually seen worse on Netflix. Whether we're talking stills or video, flare in this lens is well controlled, and if we're trying hard to create it, leaving off the lens hood, the flare is not unattractive. My copy, it should be noted, is a pre-production model, so keep that in mind, as I mentioned a couple of issues. But before I begin, I recommend the first thing that you do if you buy one of these is to check the firmware version. Checking and updating is easy to do. Use the USB-C ports to connect the lens to your computer. It'll show up as a drive. Double-click to read the README document, which will show the present firmware version. New versions are downloadable from the SIRUI site, and it's just a matter of dragging the new version into that folder and the lens will update automatically. So my lens shipped with an older firmware version, and the update saw a marked improvement in focusing, particularly in low light. Another issue I had, and still have, is with the aperture ring. There should be a lock for the auto position, like there is on a Tamron wide-angle zoom lens that I own from the early aughts. I know a lot of people welcome the aperture ring. I like them on retro or some of my old manual focus lenses, but this design can't decide where it wants to be. And this ring is easily knocked, usually into the f16 position, and you're initially left wondering why your viewfinder and or LCD has suddenly gone dark. A lock would solve this problem. For my use case, shooting stills anyway, this ring stays in the auto position. Now, from what I gather from colleagues who received their versions in January, the friction of the aperture ring has been increased significantly and is now, as one of my contacts says, perfect. Now, what this says to me is that SIRUI is responsive to feedback, and I wasn't the only person to suggest the aperture ring needed work. So, good news, because I really like this lens. The bokeh is really quite lovely. What do you think? As we've seen, and I'm not really harping on the fact, it's not super sharp, as we've perhaps been trained to expect with the new generation of lenses. But as another brush in the quiver, if you like, it has a place. A minor gripe, before I forget, the little red dot used to line up the mounting mechanism is too small and hard to see, especially in low light. It should be larger and it should be right like on the Nikon lenses. From my perspective, this 85mm 1.4 from SIRUI is a welcome addition to an expanding choice of Z-mount lenses. And I should think Fuji and Sony users would feel the same for those amounts. What do you think? Is this SIRUI lens a viable choice given the options we now have? Let us know in the comments, and I'll provide a purchase link in the description. That's an affiliate link, so I make a small commission if you buy via that link, at no extra cost to you. If you found this video useful, please do give it the old thumbs up. It really helps prompt the algorithm. And if you're new to the channel, please do consider subscribing. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss new videos from me. In the meantime, take care. Cheers. We'll see you later.